Today, we are talking about community solutions to community violence. As someone who has stood in front of congregations to deliver words of remembrance for a loved one lost to violence, I've lived the pain of someone's careless disregard for life. Too often, violent crime is used to manipulate policy and resources, and there are few news stories that cover the efforts to disrupt crime, solve crime, and most importantly, help people repair and rebuild agency in the aftermath of a crime. Since the murder of George Floyd, Minneapolis has continued to reckon with the concepts of race and public safety. After the burning of a precinct, a campaign to defund the police, and a mass exodus of officers from MPD, violent crime spiked and the city saw enough homicides to bring us to the edge of calamity. With 94 homicides in 2021, we were just shy of Minneapolis's record of 97 homicides in the year 1995, when the city was dubbed Murderapolis. Today, crime is down across the country, especially in large cities. However, in Minneapolis, we see a dangerous pattern of non-lethal assaults not being investigated and violent crimes going unsolved. On top of this, just the day before we recorded this episode, a mass shooting occurred at Annunciation Church in South Minneapolis, taking the life of 2 children, injuring others, and traumatizing everyone gathered in the space forever. This moment raises the question, how do we as a community respond in the face of violence? How do we take care of each other and act politically to make sure it doesn't happen again? With violence interrupters, behavioral crisis response, and innovative approaches to providing services to people in need, residents should be proud of our demonstrated ability to lift up our city through the power of community. And yet, for those of us who have had to lay to rest loved ones over the past 5 years, the statistics kind of don't matter. Welcome to Transformation Blueprint, where we unpack our criminal legal system and build pathways to change. I'm Justin Terrell from the Minnesota Justice Research Center, and each episode, we translate research into actionable knowledge, spotlight local and national changemakers, and connect you with ways to create a more just Minnesota. Whether you're an advocate, policymaker, or someone who cares about justice, this is your blueprint for transformation. To talk with me today about community-led responses to violence, I'm joined by a special guest. Katrina Mendoza is MNJRC's organizing lead on our Project Peace Evaluation, which is a violence intervention effort by the city of St. Paul. But she has been working alongside the St. Paul community for much longer, over 25 years. She's worked in health education, grassroots organizing, leadership facilitation, and public service. She's a community auntie and an unapologetic fighter for social and racial justice, driven by her dedication to honoring the ancestors, uplifting future generations, and making loved ones proud. She said that real lasting transformation begins in relationships with each other, and that's why she's here talking with me today about community violence prevention. Katrina, how are you feeling today?
Oh, I'm feeling good and honored to be here having this conversation with you.
We're happy to have you. So, Katrina, um, people, when talking about the criminal legal system, we talk about community violence in a lot of different ways. Given the events that we've gone through in South Minneapolis yesterday, understanding the project that we're working together on in St. Paul, um, talk to me about community violence and uh, your experience with that language, how you see it played out in the community, and what effect it has on all of us.
Yeah, so I feel like there are so many different levels of community violence, and it goes all the way from uprooting homeless encampments to uptick in suicide and overdoses. I feel like there's the obvious mass shootings in schools, and then there's a different level where young people or folks shooting are entering places that once used to be sacred, like funerals, churches, where at one time there was a order or
Hmm.
a respect for certain communities, which included children and folks who are deemed more vulnerable communities. Yeah, people are entering sacred spaces, and for me, I feel like there's a definite gap between seeing each other's humanness, and I'm not quite sure when that started. I know that gun violence has been an issue for a long time, but there's a deeper rooted issue that we haven't seen, at least in my lifetime.
Hmm. And you don't have any ideas about where that's coming from, what's going on. So when I hear you talk about the shift in community violence, what pops up for me is the shift in how we treat each other in general.
Yeah.
It's real um, toxic right now for folks who are listening to this. Today is August 28th, and yesterday in the city of Minneapolis, in South Minneapolis, there was a horrific shooting at a Catholic school. Um, and the community is really uh, wrestling with that and trying to reclaim our agency in a time of trauma. Katrina, I'm gonna ask you this question. So, when community violence happens, a lot of times it's about healing is the conversation that comes after, or gun control, or how do we get guns off the streets. For me, uh, trauma, Daniel Surratt says that the opposite of trauma isn't healing. That is like, it's not taking bubble baths. And you're somebody who I see work in community in a way where um, you carry the weight, but you also carry the hope. Um, and the work you do, to me, how I experienced you was watching you respond to that trauma through agency, which I think I experienced was powerful. Can you tell me about that approach, especially in this moment? Like a bubble bath ain't gonna cut it, right? We need to find our agency as a community. How do you suggest people do that?
So, a personal story that I want to share with you about my son. So I have three powerful young people that I raised from scratch, that became organizers in their own, um, and creating a world that they want to see. So my son Gabe was my only son. He was shot and killed in Minneapolis at up in Uptown at the Fireside nightclub. He was doing security. So when that happened, so this was, and I still don't have any answers. There was cameras everywhere. There were people everywhere with cameras, and we still don't have answers. It's almost 3 years later. So what happened in the aftermath of that, people started to show up with what they could do. So I had artists in the community start putting up orange ribbons all around the neighborhood as an act of solidarity for my family. So I had folks who love to cook start making us food and just dropping it off. Folks who were sending, who had more financial stability would send gift cards or blankets, anything that they could think of to show love to us. Other folks helped me organize and start figuring out, like doing some power mapping and figuring out who knows what, who do we reach out to. We did some door knocking. We did a whole calls to and emails to the anybody who had decision making power.
Mm-hmm.
And so folks just showed up in their strength and in the way in their gifts. And that's how they loved on us. And so that was definitely healing. Somebody organized a vigil for my son, and they brought Black Panthers and Brown Berets together to do security for that.
Okay.
And my
Okay.
son had friends from all walks of life. So he had young people from Ujama Place and from Job Corps who were showing up and sharing the impact he had on their lives. Like he really talked me off the ledge. Literally, I was going to take my life, but he walked me through it. And not just that night, he followed up, he walked me through. And so that's what I think is missing is the walking through. We get shocked immediately. We have anger. We have all of our feelings. We make a whole plan about services that need to be done. What pictures are we going to use? What music are we going to play? The dust settles, and then the community goes back into their respective lives
Trying to get back to normal.
until the next time.
Until the next time.
And so, yeah, I don't know what our question was. I got a little bit derailed, but
Trust me, you answering me. You are on topic, my sis.
yes, yes. So I think that showing up in that way let me know and my family know that we were not alone, and yet we were experiencing it in a very different way, obviously, than the community. So about 200 people showed up, all different walks of life for my son, and I really didn't know what to do with the pain and the hurt and the anger and the lack of answers. And so I got together with Asia Chugtai, who's the councilwoman in the district where he was killed, and I launched a series of community events called Fight Back. So this one was called Faith Leaders Fight Back. Okay. So faith leaders, you know, um, they have the responsibility of leading a people. They have a whole congregation of people who are looking to them. And so they know if they get a call, what to do when somebody is killed. So what do? They have people come and pray. They organize the meal. They do the service. My question was, what are we missing? Why are we seeing this uptick in gun violence? And what do you do when I call you and say my son was the person who shot the other person? Because you know what to do on the other side. So it's about accountability, responsibility. You carry a lot of responsibility when you stand in front of a congregation and lead. So there's such a missed opportunity where our young people are not being seen.
I think you're speaking really powerfully to something that doesn't get discussed often. So when community violence happens, when there's a shooting like yesterday, or frankly, when there's a shooting in the neighborhood that nobody notices, that the response, there's a couple like run of the mill responses,
Yeah.
right? You're going to get the brief story on the news, right? And they may or may not be very complimentary of the person, the victim, or the person who committed the violence. Or it's going to be a mystery, right? We don't know anything, right? We're waiting for the investigation.
Right.
And what you described to me a couple of very powerful things. One, you described the village, right?
Yeah.
The village came out and supported you. Two, you talked about working with folks in power to actually lead a conversation in the community with people who have, I mean, it's one of the things that I really respect about clergy is that, you know, that they, regardless of your faith and whatnot, like these are people who buried our loved ones.
Yes.
You know? And I feel like they're often left out of the conversation.
Right.
And so I find it very powerful that you brought all those groups together and led this conversation. Let me ask you this question though. Why isn't that the norm? Like, you kind of spoke this a little bit. Why is it that we are so programmed to treat community violence like a mystery? When we, most of the time, we know who's committing the violence, we know who benefits from it, we know where the sacrifice goes, we know that we could lead much more dynamic conversations other than why did this happen, which is the one of the other knee-jerk responses is the why, you know, what were their motives, right? And I think that there's a bigger question to ask about who we are in these moments, and we never get to that. Why do you think that is?
I think that there's so much it's even more since COVID, of separation, of I need like a scarcity mindset
Hmm.
that if I give to you or leave something there for you, then that means me and my family are not going to prosper. We're not going to be okay. There's a natural human reaction to want to protect ourselves and our families, but it was, I think, pushed so hard since COVID. If you think about, remember when it first happened, the separation of folks who got vaccinated versus who didn't,
Yeah.
and the judgment we gave each other. Like, you're going to be a zombie. That was the dumbest thing you ever could do. And the other folks were just like, you're so selfish. How could you not do this? And we separated and openly decided who was the good guy and bad guy. And then we did that across the states, where each state was able to decide for themselves who was going to, shut down their borders and all of that. And so there's so much of this. It's only about me. I
Hmm.
have to survive so my family can survive. And when we get out of that mindset and start realizing, like I just explained, the village and all the strength we had, let me tell you a different way. So this is going to be off topic, but bear with me.
I'm with
So
you. Come on.
tamales, right? Talk about tamales.
Let's
You know
go.
how much it takes to make tamales. My mom would use it as a way to pay the bills, to buy Christmas presents, to send money to Mexico to her family who was sick down there. And so everything that she did was made in love. And so to make the tamales, she needed to make, the meat, the masa. There's all these different parts. And she didn't teach us, all the sisters, all of it. Each sister got to learn one part because you'd have to come together to make the final product. And so my sister was in charge of doing the meat. I was in charge of the masa, and my daughter was in charge of rolling them and cleaning the corn husks and all that.
Yeah.
But it took all of us to be able to create this thing that then could be served up as a resource to pay bills or in love at a Thanksgiving dinner or something like that. And so that's kind of what I look at the village like.
So I love that example of the tamales because I think we were talking about this earlier, where during the pandemic or even in moments like what we're experiencing right now, it is rare that we are given a job to do. Like people don't know how to show up. So you can have a vigil and you can go out and hold your candles and frankly, like mourning is important in these moments. We have
Mm-hmm.
to find ways to mourn just to be in community with people and remember and recognize what's happening. And after that, it's time to make tamales. And it's
Yes.
like everyone's got to have a different job. You got to invite people to be able to participate in the greater effort for healing, which is around building agency. And agency is really about getting up and doing something.
Yes.
I find it to be the most powerful interaction after moments like this. But too often, especially when talking about justice issues, there are barriers erected to say, don't do anything. Don't go talk to that officer. Don't go talk to the victim or the perpetrator. Don't go talk to your neighbors. There's an investigation, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
all these boundaries around um, these situations. And what I'm inspired by you in this conversation is that you really talk about breaking those boundaries down, and you reference organizing and doing it. So as an old school
Mm-hmm.
organizer, what is organizing and what role does organizing play in breaking down those boundaries?
Yeah, so organizing, I think, is such a powerful way of life that when I first entered into it through Wesco in 2017, I wasn't aware of what it looks like to build collective power. But I did understand all of the different parts, building a base through one-to-ones, like a power analysis, a power mapping, issue cuts, campaigns. I knew about those. I just didn't have the language, and now I can apply it to how it works in my everyday life. And so organizing means you're gathering folks in your community, whether that's your location, maybe it's your spoken word community, doesn't matter. It could be cultural community, whatever you call your village. You're gathering those folks and all of those strengths we were talking about, like I said, to make the tamales. And so I was sharing with you about when you were talking about the different ways that we show up. It all seems to fit like a puzzle. You're just really bringing out each person's gift. Now, when there are people who can go down and protest boots on the ground. You see folks who are getting maced at a protest, or folks who are painting the signs that are going to be held up, folks who are coming down and bringing milk for the eyes of the folks who got sprayed. I mean, there's just so many different ways to enter in. All you have to do is want to, and there's a way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I feel like community organizing is about opening that door for people to be a part of that movement space.
Right. And thinking that absolutely nothing is impossible if we all show up and come together and we hold our own answers. You know, we're self sustaining communities and we just don't, we're so in the hustle and struggle and trying to survive that we don't stop and have time together to actually say, oh, you have this ingredient and you have this ingredient, and let's come together for the greater good of this community.
Yeah, yes, you are definitely speaking my language right here. I try to remind people two things. Like one, 5 years after the murder of George Floyd and the uprising that followed, we have a lot of organizers. What we don't have are a lot of community organizers.
Right.
So when I look back at our movements over the last 10 years or so, or 15 years, we have Occupy Wall Street, we have Black Lives Matter, we have the Me Too movement. And these are powerful movements, in my opinion. But you also had the Tea Party movement, which developed into Make America Great Again. And they have the most powerful seat in the world. And Black Lives Matter does not. And the money that was thrown at that hashtag is starting to dry up, and people are ducking away from talking about diversity. My critique, and I want to know what you think about this, is that even myself as an organizer got really good at mobilizing people, got really good at developing a small group of people to become activists. We did not, in my opinion, we did not organize the community. And we did not work on the issues that the community was dealing with. We drove people into campaigns around hashtags.
Mm.
And I wonder about the fact your experience with your son and how you responded to it is not what we do on a regular basis. It is rare. But if we had organizers who were actually community organizers, I wonder if we would have built an entire infrastructure around responding to community violence in our communities, instead of having local governments. Much love to the city of St. Paul for Project Peace and the work that they're doing and allowing us to evaluate that program. And there's a question, does that work belong in the city infrastructure, or does it belong in a community infrastructure?
I absolutely think it belongs in our community. You know, the rest of that series that I did with the Fight Back series, I went to schools, high schools, and I went to the lunches and I sat with the young people and invited them to a community listening session where I promised them they were just going to be listened to about their experience with gun violence, why the uptick, and they came. Um, the adults did not do what I asked them to do. They had an opinion and wanted to share it, but I put young people in the center of the room and they shared what they worried about, what they thought was a solution. We talked about it. Then I called another one called Families Fight Back, where I brought in, sadly, 10 families that I know just off the top of my head who have recently lost loved ones, from kids to adults, in gun violence. And we talked about what did we need that we didn't get, but also what did we have? Like me as an organizer, I have my whole community that I want others to be able to have this kind of access. And so that's that power of organizing. It's being able to hold each other down when the earth is shaking beneath you and lift each other up when you just can't stand on your feet anymore. And then it's your turn. You get to take a turn to fall back and trust your village. And then you show up and show up and show up.
That's right. That's definitely right. And what do you think about these efforts? I'm just going to clarify this question because I think it's important. So, when we're talking about community violence intervention programs, there is this debate right now where, for example, in the city of St. Paul, Project Peace, people don't know that much about that program. They know of some of the personalities associated with it, and for the most part, we're hearing really good feedback around those interactions. Across the river to Minneapolis, where we're not evaluating, I just want to be clear, it's like in the newspaper every week. And I want to know what you think about this. Is that, during the uprising, the city of Minneapolis ran to the hood and threw a bunch of money at the block and asked people, I'm thinking about the studio we're recording in right now with Tommy McBride with Don't Shoot Guns, Shoot Hoops, for example, was provided leadership in our community on this very topic of community violence, and others that have got contracts with the city to do that work. And then, 5 years later, those contracts get eliminated. 5 years later, you see, these organizations led by Black men directly impacted by these issues are in the news, and there's lawsuits. And, what are your thoughts about, do you believe these programs should be resourced in community by our people? Imagine if you had resources coming into you when you were organizing those conversations. Or is the city enterprise, the government enterprise, the ones with the solution?
I think that we are in a world where dogs are meowing and cats are barking and everything is upside down.
Yeah.
And so, that being said, I feel like when you give somebody from the city all the power and the money, same old, now they have check boxes they need to make. Folks are not folks, they're stored. How do you measure somebody's impact, and how do you measure a person's life? What's going to happen for them down the road? How it's going to change in just a few years? How would you be able to measure that? How many people do you look back in your own life, Justin, and you didn't know at the time what a blessing or pivotal person they were? And when you get the chance to look back, you see they picked you up off your path and put you on a different one, but you didn't know at the time. So how does the city measure that? And so that's one of those things that I just feel like it's the complete opposite. The community should be holding the money, and the community should be holding the resources, and they should be, if they want, tapping the city for them to come and listen instead of the other way around. Like, give the city a gift card for $25.
That's funny. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, I think about my mentors. I could sit here and name grown Black men who, really, breathe life on me to keep me from going a path that oddly, I grew up in the 1990s during Minneapolis and all of that. So, there was an expectation as a young black man in this neighborhood. We're sitting at Sabathany Community Center right now. There's an expectation in this neighborhood that you would just get caught up in guns and violence and all of that. And I mean, I'm not saying I was never in the streets. I was a sidewalks kid, right? But like, I just always thought it was funny that people was rooting for us to be like Ice Cube or something in Boys in the Hood, and that's what we were like supposed to aspire to. Um, but I had brothers around me like Wiley Scott, who you know was really a father figure to me, and Steve Floyd, who still looks out for the community. And the list goes on and on. As an adult, I got my OGs like Desmond Meade and Lawrence Henderson, who are leading movements all over the country, um, who have helped me learn the difference between organizing and community organizing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just really important that we name right now that we don't recognize those people who are disrupting violence in our communities every day. The pastors, the coaches, the youth workers, the aunties, and the uncles, the boys sit your butt down on this couch. Hey, tomorrow we finna go get a job. Like those conversations don't get any recognition, and for some reason we believe a program can actually like replace that. And the program that I would love to see and that we've advocated for in the past is like, have a chunk of money available for these folks who can actually do this work in a way that no after school program could ever do it. As a matter of fact, have those uncles and aunties lead the after school program, but give them the money to be able to do it.
And don't make them fight each other for it or tell you what they did with it or, give you a projected budget and report on it. Like there's, again, we're closest to the problem, closest to the solution. And so I love your idea of the aunties and the uncles. I'm also thinking of like the elders, the young people coming and mowing the lawns and changing the cat litter and, helping them stay in place with these small little things in return, getting some wisdom like the cheat codes of life from the elders. And just really the organizing back to that, it goes back to that. What does the community want? How do you find out? You ask them. And so hearing from the young people, what do you want? What's the kind of community neighborhood you want to live in? And then making that happen.
I will say that this is a conversation about community violence, and I find ourselves falling into a pattern of a conversation about how do we support each other and recognizing the different ways that our communities have supported each other, which makes me suspicious, right? Like, there's the way things are is not an accident, right? Like all the problems we're dealing with are people made problems. And I think about theories of transformative justice that say we should rely on each other 2/3 of the time and rely on the state or the government 1/3 of the time. And, some would argue that that's like a conservative, you know, idea and concept. But when I actually think about it, I think, that we do that in a lot of ways. When I was young and my family was homeless, we relied on everybody, right? Like we was never calling, we didn't call on the state for nothing. I remember asking my mom, like, yo, why don't you go on welfare? Just like, my own boy, my best friend's mom is on welfare. He gets to hang out with his mom. He work 3 jobs and I never get to see you. And she looked at me and said, if I go on welfare, we'll never get out of poverty, Justin. And I was 7 years old at the time, right? And I can imagine how hard of a conversation as a father now of a 7-year-old who asks me difficult questions, how difficult that must have been for my mom at the time. But then when I think back to it, she was working 3 jobs, but we were also living with another family, right? We didn't have a car, so we took the bus. And if we got a ride somewhere, it was from someone in our neighborhood. And I grew up in Phillips neighborhood, right? So it's like, you know, um, we eat at each other's houses, figure out whose house smelled the best. You know what I'm saying? And
Oh yeah.
we was eating over there. Learn how to cuss each other out in different languages. And,
Yep.
that's how I grew up with this like strong idea of we support each other, we lean on each other in community. And I think that there are people in power. I'm not going to make it like a boogeyman situation, but there are people who benefit from eroding that culture
Hmm.
and making it a mystery so that when community violence happens, we don't just fall back on those things. What do you think about that?
When you were talking, I was just thinking about the event I just threw, the Festival of Rights
It
event.
was a great event, by the way.
Thank you. Um, you know who helps? Mom and pop shops, small business owners. That's who comes and supports. That's who reaches out. The organizations that are barely staying afloat, those are the ones who will come in and extend what they have. They will offer it to you. So your statement about like we're taking care of ourselves, we really are taking care of ourselves. If you think about other events you might have thrown in the past, let's say you hit up Target or Walmart or I don't know, Dick's Sporting Goods. Usually the answer is no if you get an answer. Every once in a while they might, if it's the right tax time, contribute. So the folks with the money, the folks with the power, you can always count on the folks who are just like us.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it takes from them, they're more than happy to do it. So when when Gabe died, Boca Chica, El Burrito both held a Gabe's Plate fundraiser. And so for 2 separate days, it was called Gabe's Plate, and they give us all the money from those. And a local bar um, called Shady's, they also helped do a fundraiser for us. Everybody just came together again in the gift that they had, the strength that they had, what they could do. And so these restaurants and the bar that came together made it so that we could put up a billboard in the area where Gabe was killed. And so the thing is that they had more money than a lot of the community, so they were able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't have more money than Target or Dick's Sporting Goods, see? So that's what I'm saying is like, yeah, you're 100% spot on with that. Um, we do take care of ourselves, even if we don't see it.
Yeah, and I feel like there's actually a reason that we don't see it. I think that
Mm,
idea is removed from the conversation about community violence. Um,
say more.
well, okay, so I'm trying to think of a good example. So uh, here, okay, let's just go down my list of critiques on our response to community violence. So number one, the mystery factor. It's a shock, or the shock and awe and the mystery factor that someone got shot in the neighborhood, and it's like, oh my gosh, and it's like um it's a mystery and we don't know what happened,
Hmm.
and that leads to why these assumptions like, why are black people always shooting each other, why are these illegal immigrants always involved in violence?
Hmm.
And it's not the case. The suicide rate in this country is much higher than the homicide rate in this country, and we don't even talk about it. And homicide is actually a pretty rare occurrence, especially in Minnesota. And when it happens, it is shocking. It is something that we should be outraged about. We should have an emotional response to. And then we should come back into our bodies, into our adult brain, and recognize that there are some patterns that constantly repeat. Most community violence is committed against people that know each other,
Hmm.
which should make those crimes fairly easy to solve. Um, but if the community doesn't trust law enforcement, they're not going to talk. Or if it's not safe for an immigrant to talk to law enforcement,
Right.
they're not going to talk to them. And so now law enforcement doesn't have the connections and relationships necessary to solve crimes, which is where you end up with a 40% rate of solving violent crime in Minneapolis, which is just to be clear, on the other side of the river, I believe it's like 70%. And in the past, Minneapolis has gotten so good at solving crimes, it was in the 80, it was like above 80%. When systems fail to solve crimes, when the criminal legal system fails to intervene and solve crimes, it begins to facilitate the next crime.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't trust law enforcement to intervene in my situation before it, and when I call them and before things get out of control. Well, then if I can't call them and I know things will get out of control, then I'm not crazy for purchasing a weapon off the street.
Right.
And I'm not crazy for using that weapon against someone who would assault me. And now the violence in the community continues to grow and spread. And the response only fuels the next incident. Instead of ensuring we have a response like your leadership showed when you lost Kay. I don't want to go on another rant. Can I share one thing?
Yes.
So in February 2022, my cousin was also murdered in Uptown. And, you know, our family had a really difficult time with that, obviously. And unfortunately, that wasn't the only incident I experienced that month. So, Amir Locke was murdered around that time. D. Hill was murdered around that time. And so, by the end of the month of February, I'd gone to 2 funerals. And then I went down to Montgomery, Alabama to visit the Legacy Museum. Talk about slavery, the history of race and mass incarceration. And when I think back about that on that time, like, none of this is an accident to me. These are all people-made problems that can only be solved by people. And we continue to treat it like shock and awe and a mystery. And you can't deliver justice if you're always surprised about what's going on in our communities. We understand these things. We have expertise. When you lose somebody, you develop some expertise.
Oh, yeah.
And there are no resources to help us share that. And the narrative that is pushed out doesn't ever call on people's expertise to respond to these moments. And to me, like, that is the real crime. Because it puts up barriers between our humanity and doesn't allow us to tap into what we could use. And frankly, what I see being used in North Minneapolis right now is people leaning on each other in relationships, and crime is the lowest it's been in a very long time in North Minneapolis while it's exploding on the south side. So let me ask you this question, Katrina. What is your highest intention for how we learn to respond to community violence going forward in St. Paul?
I would like the community to be able to find pride in taking ownership of our community and taking care of ourselves. And I would love for what you were just saying, that you went through it with your family. I went through it with my family. I have wisdom to offer that I wish I didn't have, you wish you didn't have. We have something to offer, and it's not a program, and it's not, it's something that we can lock arms and pour into you because we've been there. We could do this with you, but we're not tapped for those things. And so somewhere for me, my highest intent is that we see humanness in each other again. We value life. again, we realize that it really is just a very short ride. So how can I pour into you and then have you pour into the next person, and that we become good ancestors.
I'm definitely about that, making my ancestors proud.
Yeah.
That's
I wanted to tell you a story. You got a second for that?
tell the story.
Okay. So my mom and dad, biological mom and dad were, they call themselves free loving hippies, right? And so, but they were in high school, and so they couldn't take care of me. And my biological, paternal grandparents made the decision to raise me. They were all done raising their kids. One is undocumented until Clinton's in office, and they were both just came from poverty. And so when they got to move to the west side, they got to build this house, and it was like a dream come true for everybody in their family, because coming from a hut with a dirt ground, a sheet on a rope that you pull across, and a hole in the ground to go to the bathroom, and now to get to own your own home that you're watching being built, and you're still undocumented, and you're just like working at a gas station. This is some powerful stuff. And so as a result, my mom, my paternal grandma, she told us all that you know, you needed to community tithe. So you have something, even if, she didn't want to make any waves because she's undocumented, but she still wanted to give back to community. So she was known as the lady in the blue house, La Señora en la Casa Azul. And so strangers would come and knock on our door growing up, and my mom had a coat closet for them. Because when you're from the South, you really don't know what cold is in the North, right? So folks are showing up with little zip up hoodies, and my mom's got a whole closet full of different size coats for them. So she would pray with them. They would get coats, and then she would call El Burrito when it was a small mom and pop shop, and that's where she worked. And they could get food on her account, and she was known as that, all just within the community. So she was La Señora en la Casa. So you come and get prayed for, you get your coat, and then you get this food. And sometimes she wouldn't even get a check, right? Later on down the line, that shifted. And while she still kept this coat closet for folks, she no longer worked there. And she started seeing our undocumented folks who were struggling with alcoholism and addiction, and she wanted to restore dignity. So she would give them jobs at the house. She'd feed them, pray for them, and give them jobs that every week they would come and rake the leaves or take out the trash or whatever it might be. And so that's how my mom gave back. That's what we all grew up seeing. And eventually, my dad said he built a shed for them, because if you get deported or if you get put in detox, losing all of your belongings is so hard to rebuild from that. So he built a shed, and in the backyard we would hold these things for folks if they were undocumented, or, I mean, if they were deported or taken a detox, and we would hold their belongings. And in the end, when my mom ended up passing away, this houseless community gave her one last gift. We were at her funeral, and when we came back, they had raked the leaves, and one last effort to honor my mom. And that's the kind of responsibility that I live with. That's my right and my responsibility to community tithe in a way that has Katrina sprinkled on it. Yeah.
So how do we make that part of the blueprint?
Yeah.
Because what you're talking about is definitely transformative.
Yeah.
And I think that what you're describing exists in our communities. It exists in your community.
Yeah.
It definitely existed in my community growing up. You shoveling the snow, just keep going down the block, right?
Right.
Make sure that your elders don't have to worry about it. So is that a key factor in the blueprint for transformation in our response to community violence?
I think that's that missing piece. That is 100% the missing piece. Seeing each other, showing up for each other, community tithing, and that whole idea of we all have an ingredient to make the tamale resource or gift, you know?
That is one heck of a recipe you just laid out.
Yeah.
And tell me about what's the role of the state?
Uh,
Because if we don't give them a job,
can't they be the grant writers?
yeah,
They can find the money and give it to us. I think that's a good spot for
they
them.
found the money. It's from our taxes. So
Except for,
you know, they can
yeah.
get it back in our
yeah,
community.
exactly.
And not to throw shade at local government.
No.
They do put money back into our communities in a lot of meaningful ways. But on this particular issue of community violence, I've seen it used one too many times to justify budgets for law enforcement that community doesn't trust, instead of investing back into community solutions so that we have more community tithers
Right.
and more tamale makers.
Mhm.
Right? Like, I think that you know, that's the part of the blueprint that needs to be sussed out.
Yeah, I think so too.
Katrina, before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to share with us? You've given us a lot of gifts today. And just to be clear, you know, you are on contract with the MNJRC, and so I get to work with you often. And you give us gifts every time I'm in space with you. And so I want to acknowledge that. Thank you for that. I appreciate you doing this conversation with us. Is there anything you want to say to the people before we wrap up?
I think what I would say is start seeing each other again, acknowledging people, opening the door for people. When you see a young person continuously, let's say you work at the corner store, you acknowledge that, you know, they're doing a good job, or if they look down. People need to be seen. We're so busy on our phones, in our heads, so busy on the thing that we're working on. If the city folks were more leaning into the community member they want to be versus the title that they hold, I think it might shift some things too.
I definitely resonate with that. So the old school youth worker in me learned a long time ago. You can disrupt a fight, you can disrupt a shooting, you can disrupt a robbery. There's all kinds of community violence you can disrupt, especially with young people, if you just let them know that you see them. And I'm not saying like I'm watching you. That's not what I'm saying.
No.
It's really just like, hey, bro, I see you. Are you doing okay? Do you need something? Do you really want to go down that path? Yo, just come holler at me, man. Let's go for a walk. You know, those type of things. Those type of interventions from community members I've seen change young people's lives. They would come back and said to me or to others, like, you saw me that one day, bro. I was on some this, and if I hadn't seen you, if you hadn't seen me, I'd have probably made a really bad mistake that day. I've heard that conversation so many times. So when you talk about seeing each other, I think that's really valuable. What do we need to make sure we look for when we see each other?
You know, I think what's important is we're not looking deep enough. It's so simple. How many people did you pass on the way in the building today? The guy at the door who was helping the lady get her groceries into the Uber and her baby. The guy who I signed in at the front desk, the person I passed in the hallway. I don't know that I personally took time to acknowledge each one of these people that I'm passing, because we're so time poor. We just don't have time for anything anymore. We don't got time to be talking to people and saying hello. How many people do you pass in the morning at the gas station and you say good morning and they just look at you like you're losing it. What are you talking to me for? Or they give you that weird upside down smile thing. Yeah. And so seeing each other without like just everybody gets to be seen. There's not like a prerequisite for me to see you. And now if I recognize that I've seen you a couple of times, maybe that's my indicator to start the conversation. If you're looking sad, if you're looking depleted, if you look like you need to be poured into just a little bit, taking a moment to be able to see folks like you say, I see you and you matter to me. And you know, that impact that you have, that you just talked about, that you hear all the time, that impact that you had on people's lives, they probably didn't notice in that moment. They might have even been rolling their eyes that you stopped them that day. They're frustrated that you're trying to talk something to them. What does this dude even know? Later, having changed the course of their life.
But a teenager rolling their eyes at a caring, consistent adult, never. Sarcasm. I think you're spot on. Dr. Sean Ginwright, who spoke at our conference last year, plugged for the annual Reimagining Justice Conference, um, talked about having really good racial equity lenses to see the world. But what's more important is that you have a mirror to see yourself and how you show up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about seeing other people like that, it reminds me of that advice. Because the question is, what am I looking for? And often I'm looking to other people to see if I can recognize that little bit of hope in me that I feel about my people. Do I see that in this person carrying their groceries out to Bethany out of the food shelf in the basement? Do I see it in Daryl sitting at the front desk? Do I see it in Tommy when he's got the gym full of a bunch of neighborhood kids? And if you can find that in folks, that we can connect over that. And um, I believe that that's also part of the blueprint, right? It's also part of how we transform conditions in our community is by seeing that little bit of hope that we are able to hold on to during moments like yesterday. During moments like when I found out my cousin was murdered, or when you tragically lost your son. You know, we can pass policies to change how we do investigations. We can pass policies. We can utilize the consent decree in Minneapolis to increase uh, to increase the force's ability to solve cases. We can do a lot of that stuff. But at the end of the day, and I think this is the moment that our country is in right now, is that we're gonna have to make some decisions about how we see each other, about what roles we find ourselves in a crisis and how we support each other. And frankly, we're gonna have to learn really quickly here how to fight back in creative ways against people who don't want us to see each other, who don't want us to make the tamales, and don't want us to heal and find our agency on the other side of trauma. Katrina, how do you feel about our time together?
Oh, it's just never enough. I wish we had more time to continue having these conversations because it feels we were just hitting the skeleton for the blueprint.
That's the whole point of this program, right? This podcast is to have conversations that don't necessarily always offer the answers, but lean on our experiences to help us uncover the blueprint.
And provoke thought and become that impactful person that changes lives that you didn't even know, that you might never even meet.
That's right. That's right. So, before we go, in your bio, you talked about your ancestors, right? Tell the people who your ancestors are.
So, my ancestors are farm workers. They work long hours for short time lifespans. They they are faith filled. They are Spanish speaking. They're from Mexico, and they are abundant in family and blessed in love and commitment to one another and seeing each other do better. That's why I want to be a good ancestor for my descendants who I'll never even meet. I'm working on creating a world through my own community tithing that makes it better for my descendants.
Respect. Katrina, thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your continued labor and work to serve your community, to do good in this world. And as a fellow organizer who loves chants, when you get people in the streets, something you said earlier that I want to come back to is one of my favorite chants that a 7-year-old taught me years ago. Is that we are unstoppable, another world is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And working with you really does make me believe that. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Transformation Blueprint. Here at the JRC, we believe in the power of possibility and transformation. This work translates our efforts, aligns transformation initiatives, and provides education on complex legal issues, all to share the story of our collective work and how we can all contribute to it. Join us next time as we continue building the blueprint for a more just Minnesota. Till then, stay engaged, stay curious, and remember that transformation starts with you.
This podcast is made possible with support from listeners like you. If you want to help us continue doing this work, visit mnjrc.org/donate. You can also support this podcast by sharing this episode with your community, by liking it, rating it, commenting, and following us. Also, be sure to check out the description below, which includes a lot of helpful links, including our social media and our website. Thank you.